Hey everyone, welcome back to Poplar Preparedness. This is going to be a discussion about CB radios in general, which I highly recommend, and also the President McKinley radio in particular. Before we get into everything, I want to clarify my relationship with President as a company. I did my research first. I decided that this was the radio for me. I then reached out to President and saw if I could do a review for them. They said yes. They sent me this, but don't tell them, but I was going to buy it anyway if they had said no. I will not try to sell you anything that I would not buy myself, okay? This unit itself is the President McKinley. It is not the cheapest one out there. It is not the most expensive one out there. In fact, it's on kind of the lower end of base units with these options. And some of those options I'm going to go through that are so very critical. CB radios in general. Why CB radios? If you do not want to get a license, or if you do not have a license, you really only have two options. You have the family radios, which are the little push-to-talk toy radios that kids use and such. Everybody has them. There's only a few channels on it. Everyone's going to be using it. You can only have very, very little power on that. So it's not really useful for you communicating with anyone off your property. It's only really useful for communicating possibly with your neighbors and people on your own property if you have a little bit bigger of a property. But even there, if you have big property, you're going to run into issues there too. They really don't have much power. If you've ever used them in a city situation, you know that everybody uses those channels and it gets really, really cluttered real fast. CB radios also don't require a license, yet you can get out further. Their frequencies are not cluttered, not nearly to the extent that the family radio is. And then also, you're going to be talking to more interesting people. People who have those little handheld radios, most of them are probably not going to be the best people to be talking to anyway. Whereas if you think about who has CB radios, people who are in heavy industries, people who are truckers, people who are emergency personnel, emergency services sometimes and will monitor the frequencies to see those who are in need. So if you called out on a CB radio network, you might get emergency personnel. Additionally, when we talk about ham radio operators who have the capability to transmit over long distances, who are also linked in locally with networks on the 2-meter bands, things you're not allowed to do unless you have a license. But they're also going to be monitoring the CB radio transmissions. CB radio has 40 frequencies, 40 channels. And we're going to get into why sideband is so important. But 40 channels, they're not nearly as cluttered, which is good. It's a little bit more to get into CB radios, and that is going to be a hurdle that's going to keep a lot of people off of it, which I think is important. It allows you to freely communicate as needed with people that you want to communicate with. So that's why CB in general. Other than the fact that a CB radio generally is going to get you out to about 3 to 7 miles, depending on your terrain. Sometimes, under favorable circumstances, you can get out to 30 miles. Under super good conditions, like unusual situations with like solar flares and stuff like that, you can get out much further. But all that to say, you're not going to be able to do that with a little handheld push button thing, okay? But you can legally use these in good times as well as bad, and this will not blow back on you because this is free to use for American citizens. If you're in other countries, it's going to be different. Some other countries have citizens band as well, but there's sometimes different frequencies. Just check the laws in your country. This is for Americans specifically at this time. So this is the U.S. version of the radio. It is programmed with the U.S. frequencies for citizens band. Now, I said 40 channels. However, this radio has sideband, which is very important. Sideband allows you to use channel 40, but then channel 40 upper band or channel 40 lower band. That basically gives you 3 times as many channels. So this base unit here can actually access 120 channels effectively. If you have just a regular CB radio without upper band and lower band, someone could be talking in the upper band or the lower band of your channel and you wouldn't know. That is a big deal. It's like opening up essentially 80 new channels. So if you want to listen to everybody, you want to have sideband. You don't want people talking around behind your back on a sideband. You want to be able to listen in on them. Plus, if you're talking in a sideband, people with regular CB radios may not be able to actually pick you up, and that is a useful thing. You're not allowed to use encryption or anything like that on Citizens Band. However, sideband gives you a little bit of privacy, not terribly much, but maybe a little bit. All right, when you look at the Citizens Band radios built for vehicles, you're not going to be getting your outlet prong for AC wall outlets, okay? You basically, like this one, it comes with just 2 bare wires, and you need to figure out what to do with them. This can hook up to 24 volt or 12 volt. You can switch it over to go to 24 volt, but right now it's set up to operate off 12 volt, which you'll see here. I have a 12 volt lithium iron phosphate battery that I got for like $45 on Amazon. They're not there anymore. They're more expensive, unfortunately. And then also I have a charge controller that is plugged into the wall to charge the battery. Okay. That's how I'm operating this right now, but I can charge my 12 volt batteries off of my solar panels, and that's what I will do in a grid down situation. You can also just charge up the batteries and then operate off batteries if you're in a shorter term disaster scenario. So all that is about radios in general. Radios in particular. Let's talk about why a base unit as opposed to a handheld. Base units have longer range. It will allow you to put an antenna on your vehicle. Some of the handhelds do have that capability, but a vehicle is a metal box, which isn't good for your radio signals, okay? You need to have your antenna on the outside of your vehicle, not the inside of your vehicle. Or else it becomes very, very limited in range. So having a magnetic antenna is going to work well for that. This is designed to be plugged into your car, built into, you can get an adapter to put that into your cigarette lighter. You can hardwire that into your car's electronics and get that power that way. Also, you can I think this is easier to hook it up like this to a power supply that's going to be charged off solar. Handhelds, you have to have charging stations and all that. But the big thing for me is the longer range. The longer range and the ease of use are really what sells me on a base station. The idea is behind me is going to be a table soon where I'm going to have CB radio as well as a HF radio as well as a base station for like 2 meter and such as well. The idea is for this to be my ability to communicate with the outside world. So if YouTube goes down because the power grid is down, I do plan on actually continuing these not videos, but broadcasting on the radio. So that is the long-term plan, is to be able to transmit on HF radio so that you guys, if you have your receivers, you can actually pick up those transmissions if the grid were to be down. I will be active on JS8 call, which is a protocol that allows radios to communicate with each other over long distances and basically send text messages throughout the network. So basically you can text somebody on the network in another country or whatever, and every radio basically functions as like a hub that it's a mesh network. that they can transmit through. So you're transmitting your messages out, but then you're also passing along messages from one station to another station, and in that way, everyone can kind of get their messages to where they need to go. JS8 call, something to look into if you're going to get into ham radio. You are going to need a license to get into that for sure. There will be a separate video talking about that. However, if you are trying to talk to somebody who's a little further away, there's several ways to do that in a grid down situation. One is talk to them directly. So if you have CB radio, you can possibly reach out to them. But if you want to reach out to someone further, one option is for you to relay that through someone who has an HF radio, okay? And if they have an amateur radio setup, they're almost certainly going to have CB capability. So if you can talk to somebody who has a base station for amateur radio in your area, because they have a CB radio, they can then pass your information on, or they can give you an update of what's happening out there in the world. So entry-level radio is going to be CB radio. Now, this President McKinley has some great attractive options for preppers. The big one, like I said, is the sideband. Having the sideband capability gives you the more channels, more options on talking, and also the more options on listening. This radio also has built-in weather channels, the emergency weather channels, which is great for two things. One, for emergency weather. But also, in an emergency situation, they are also going to be taken over by the emergency broadcast system. So if there are government and emergency broadcasts being made in your area, they will also come through on the weather channels. That's important to note. They will also use all the commercial channels as well. So like if you have like music radio stations or news radio stations in your area, AM, FM, they will broadcast on those. You've heard those tests before. But they'll also come through on your weather radio. Now that's something that's on standard on a lot of these. I understand that. You can set it up so that it alerts you. If there is an alert that goes out, an emergency broadcast, it will cut in to your it will just flip you over to that channel to listen to the emergency broadcast. That's something you can set up on here, or you can not set up on it if you want to. It has fine-tuning capability, coarse and fine-tuning capability that you can dial in the frequency. That's important. It also has a SWR meter built in. So if you get your antenna from Amazon, you can see if your Amazon antenna is tuned properly. And if your Amazon antenna can actually be tuned, then you can tune it and you can see that it's dialed in properly. This antenna is not tuned properly and it is not tunable, which makes me kind of upset with it, which is why it's probably going back to Amazon to get a replacement that does tune. Anyway, my problem, not yours. So that runs, that's a cheap Chinese antenna, and it was like $30 or so, and you can get those. It doesn't usually come with the radios themselves, so you are going to need to get an antenna. Get a better one than I did, okay? Also, of course, you can do all sorts of little adjustments. I have it set up so that it's beeping right now when I change the channel. You can turn the beep off. You can change the lights. You can do all that kind of stuff. The push-to-talk actually has some nice features on it. You can actually change your channel up on the top there without actually letting go of this and actually messing with the dials. You can just change that way. You can also set it up so that it is activated by voice. So if you set it to activate by voice, you can have a conversation with somebody and it'll start transmitting when it hears your voice speaking, and then when your voice stops, it stops transmitting. Obviously, that has some applications that are useful, or you can use your push-to-talk, whichever is best for you. Volume control, of course, and then you also have the squelch control. But unlike a lot of CB radios, you'll see a lot less dials on this thing. It is very user-friendly. That is one of the chief selling points, I think, of the President, because a lot of you guys who are listening to me talk about the possibility of having some communications in a grid-down situation, you need ease of use, right? You don't want something super complicated. And this can be relatively easy, straight out of the box. It's got a very easy learning curve as opposed to some of the other CB radios I looked at. It's got the features that you need, but without all the complexity or the weirdness and all that kind of stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff you can do, but you have to get into the menus and stuff like that to set them up. You can get somebody who knows what they're doing to set it up for you, and then they can just, then you don't have to deal with that kind of stuff. Whereas a lot of CB radios have a lot more dials on them, and you bump something and off it goes to, not working or behaving all sorts of weirdness. So those are kind of the features you got. This is 12 volt as well as 24 volt. So if you need a 24 volt, this will work for that as well. So all in all, you're looking at generally what I'm seeing out there is if you get a real good bargain, you're looking at 150. General retail price right now is like 200. So if you look for used ones, if you look for I'm talking about like Amazon used, and then also like if you get a bargain, you can get them at like 175 or something like that. So just hunt around. Because these are some of the most popular radios out there, CB radios, there's a good chance you may be able to find these used locally. Of course, people love them, so it's harder to find them locally, right? But all that to say, there's a lot of great options to do with this. It's simple, and that's why I recommend it. You can reach out to people that can actually help you with one of these. If you have questions about it, go ahead and put those in the comments below. I'm not an expert on all things radios. I am learning. I have my amateur radio license now, and so I am starting to build out my kit and starting to learn all the things, but I will do my best to help you guys out. Hopefully I put this out in layman's terms enough for you non-radio folks to think about CB radios. I will be coming back with some other options for you as we get into ham radio and amateur radio that you do need licenses for. Those will be in future videos, and I'm also going to be talking to you about how to get your ham radio license in the future, about the process and what it takes and all that kind of stuff. All right. Well, I will talk to you later. Steve Poplar, out.